Welcome to Kopi Talk, an NTU podcast centered around talking about the most pressing and relevant student issues. I'm your host for today, Wayne, from the NTU's Inspire social media team. And for today, we will be talking about GenAI, or more specifically, the relationship students have with GenAI. And to do so, we have two amazing guests. So we can start us off with some guest introductions.
Okay, so my name is Arfa and I'm currently year 3 in Wikimwi.
My name is Darren. Currently, I'm year 2 in business.
So I do believe that we're all around the same age, and we're all currently students in NTU, and AI sort of appeared towards the later half of our educational lives. So I think it would seem that a lot of times people turn to Gen AI for help. And I think your students have needed, let's be honest, we've needed help for a very, very long time. And now with Gen AI, it just seems so easy and convenient. So how does it actually compare, in your opinion, to maybe just doing the normal thing and asking a classmate or perhaps even the professor themselves?
Okay, I think for me is that sometimes I struggle a bit with like understanding what like my classmates or professors, like, what they explain to me. Sometimes they might explain it and like I just don't catch it like on the first try, like that they tell it to me. So sometimes I go to ChatGPT to kind of like, explain it to me like a bit more simply. Yeah. And then I think I like that there's no judgment. And also because sometimes like in the middle of class, like it's a bit too awkward to like raise up your hand. Like, maybe the professor is like really deep into like what they're teaching and you kind of don't like, the feelings of paise as like a student and you don't really want to like disturb them. So yeah, and then I turn to ChatGPT most of the time to kind of like clear my doubts and stuff. Yeah.
Right. So, and how have the quality of the answers or the advice been? Has ChatGPT most of the time been useful, or is it something where like, no, this is not right?
Okay, most of the time I think it's been useful, like because sometimes I don't understand a certain term, so they kind of explain it to me simply, but it's not the same as the one that the teacher actually flashes in class.
So, Darren, similar experiences in business or maybe slightly different?
Honestly, I resonate with what she says. So if you say it in terms of writing, right, on those like very general basis, it's really easy to like ChatGPT and get really good quality content. And I think the perk of having ChatGPT is that I don't need to go through the initial phase of ideating and everything. I can just use what is being given and add on to it. But I think for like more in-depth modules, like I would say accounting or statistics, those who require like specific domain knowledge, it struggles to actually give useful input or answers. So if I put a question inside and the answer generated, like I would say half the time it's wrong. And it doesn't help because when sometimes it's right and it's wrong, you can't like differentiate it. And your only source of help is like approaching like professors and like students and everything, which I would say is useful, but because sometimes profs are not that accessible compared to like ChatGPT or any AI tools, so that's like the barrier of it, I guess.
Right. On that note, I do want to pose a question to you. You guys can think about this. But I think with what you said, this would be a very relevant question. But in your own personal opinion, would you say that Gen AI is a crutch or a beneficial tool?
Okay, I think personally for me, I think it is a beneficial tool, mainly because sometimes it takes me quite a bit, like, it's very hard for me to like ideate certain topics and stuff, especially coming from like a more creative side, like, creative writing and stuff like that. So sometimes I do need like a bit of help trying to ideate something. But, I don't try to totally rely on it because, ultimately, like, you have to use your own abilities to kind of do your assignments. So I think it is a beneficial tool because it has helped a lot of people. And, it has helped me, like, clarify my doubts about certain terms and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it is a beneficial tool, yeah, for me, personally.
For me, honestly, it just really boils down on how the student and how the individual approaches it. If you're using it as an escape from your assignments, then it could be a crutch. But if you're using it with the purpose of learning and acquiring more knowledge and trying to like make the process more efficient and effective, it could be a really beneficial tool. So I think for any like new emerging technology, it's just like how like Google was first introduced back then. People would thought that, oh, this would be like the end of students because they can rely on Google for everything. But now it's all over the place and people don't bat an eye about it. So I feel like it's more of a process of adapting and trying to implement it in our real lives and see how we can slowly make it in a way that we won't misuse it in that sense.
So I think we've all sort of drawn the conclusion that Gen AI is pretty useful to students and it has provided us lots of benefits. But, sometimes with the growing concerns of AI, certain professors may or may not permit the use of AI or they sort of have their own philosophies to it. And I think we're just going to address the elephant in the room. I think for the sake of this podcast, let's refer to it as the NTU Gen AI saga. So what was your level of concern with it? Were you very much sort of, oh, this is just news that happened and maybe I'll just follow about it? Or were you like, oh, I think this is very interesting and this sort of concerns me and I want to find out more?
Okay, I think for me personally, it concerned me because I was like, oh, like, does this mean like, because since it made like, national headlines, like, so I was thinking like, oh my God, like, are they gonna like, try to ban like Gen AI after this? Is that how it's gonna be? Like, what about like all of us who are, just getting used to it or like just getting a hang of it?
So Darren, how did the whole case sort of present itself to you?
As students, we tend to use AI quite a lot. So the concern was whether or not schools start banning or whether or not this would be like just a blanket solution to everything. And because I feel like a lot of our coursework involve different types and different levels of AI required, so having this tool removed entirely from NTU, I think for me, it would be quite scary because I feel like it is a good resource and it is a good tool that students should utilize and capitalize on. But ultimately, I feel if the final approach is to remove it, I think it would be more detriment than actual usefulness because I think in the real world or like in the near future, I think it's very obvious that AI would be in our lives quite prominently in that sense. So if the ultimate take was to ban this usage, I feel like there would be an issue on how students will approach it after they graduate, after they leave this bubble, I would say.
Judging from what you guys have said, a very, very important thing is the way that profs choose to communicate their own philosophies and their own relationships with AI. So in your experience, how have professors actually addressed AI in the courses that you've been taking?
I think personally is managing expectations. So I think before each class starts in the first week, what they would do is brief us through what is allowed, what is not allowed. And during that segment, it would involve like how AI can or cannot be used. And of course, I think when comparing to our peers, right, you can tell that some professors are much more lenient in that sense, and some professors are much more stringent. So it really boils down on how they manage in the first class. And I think to whichever prof that you have, I think ultimately the safest bet is always to just follow what they have said and mentioned and use that as a guide throughout your entire course in the semester because ultimately they are the ones marking. So you have to cater and adhere to maybe what they expect you to learn, the learning outcomes from that class.
Yeah, that does sound very concerning. And I think we've talked about experiencing changes to the attitudes of AI from the same prof, from the same course. But I do believe that all of us, we're taking multiple courses at the same time, and different profs will have different expectations of Gen AI use. And do you honestly feel that you have to sort of remember who has what kind of attitude towards Gen AI and how much can I use AI in this course and that course, or do you just go like, I just navigate it as I go on?
I would say it would be a more spontaneous approach. So navigating it as I move through all the courses and see whether or not I actually need to use AI for that course, I would say. So I think aside taking professor as a guideline, I also need to like self-evaluate whether or not do I actually need the tool or not. Because ultimately it still boils down to the learning process on how much I want to learn from that course. So if I use AI, would it hinder my learning process? Would it be like the short way out? So I think that's also like a factor that I would take into consideration on evaluating whether or not I would use AI in any of my assignments.
On that, let's close off on a bit of a strong note. And I'd just like to ask you one very, very simple question. So as a student, is there anything that you'd like to say to your prof or faculty or something that you hope that they understand about students or your relationship with AI in university?
Yeah, I think they just need to come to terms with the fact that it's a very normal tool. I've heard of like people like even in the working world now, they're using it like in their everyday life to like write emails, to write their own essays or like to prepare their presentations and stuff. So it's a very normal tool, and I think, the faculty needs to come to terms with the fact that, students are going to use it even when they graduate after this. So, instead of trying to disallow them from using it, maybe try to let them use it so that they can slowly get used to it when they graduate and, they are actually prepared for like the future workforce. Because, if you disallow it now, they might be behind like all the developments that, Gen AI might have come up with over the next few years. So, it's better to let them use an experiment now. and, prepare for the work life. Yeah.
Just let the students have the autonomy to decide. Because I think as grown adults and as university students, we do have a certain level of responsibility on ourselves to take charge on whether or not we want to use AI for these projects. So ultimately, I do understand the purpose of all these guidelines is to ensure that we have the intended learning outcome. If you really choose to use AI and take the shortcut, maybe so be it, because that is ultimately our choice. And I would say for those who are willing to learn, they will always be willing to learn whether or not there are tools. But for those who are not willing to learn, even if there's no AI present, they will always find a shortcut to it. So it still boils down to how students' attitude approaches it in the end.
Okay, and on that note, I do believe that that's all the time that we have today. Thank you two so much for being here. And thank you for watching today's podcast. If you like what you see, drop NTU Inspire a follow and stay tuned for the next episode of Kopi Talk.